Well, it is 10:30, and that means it's time for Brainstorming the Human Connection, brought to you by South Dakota Humanities Council. And we hope that we are engaging in and expanding your connection to other human beings. And that is a very important part of the mission for the South Dakota Humanities Council. One of the things that we are all connected to is our health. There are a lot of things. The most important thing you have in life is time. You run out of that, the rest is academic. And the next is probably health, and that spans a whole bunch of things: physical health, mental health, spiritual health, etc. But today, we're going to be talking mostly about mental health, or actually physical health and mental health. And out here on our prairie, and we're in South Dakota for those of you who are not, out here on our prairie, we actually have a lot of health problems. And unfortunately, they're not really taken care of often, as well as they should be. And I certainly can feel like I'm one of those people who don't pay nearly enough attention to my health and all of the things I should be doing. But today we have a guest, Ashley Ragsdale, who is the executive director of of Healing Words Foundation. And they put on a number of programs under the Prairie Doc iteration. Lots of, she'll tell you more about those a little later. But those programs, well, she'll tell you all about them, so I'm not going to put words in her mouth, or she'll have to try to say, well, he said this, but we don't do all that, so, in case I would get it wrong. But at any rate, welcome, Ashley. And before we get started, though, I want to encourage you all to make some notes about anything that comes up, or we're not going to do diagnosis. So if you say, well, I got that funny itch under my back, does that mean I have cancer? No, we're not doing that today. What we're going to be talking about is the state of health in South Dakota, and how the Healing Words Foundation and the programs that they produce go toward addressing those issues. So welcome, Ashley.
Thank you, Lawrence, and thanks to the South Dakota Humanities Council for having me on this morning. I'm excited to talk about the Healing Words Foundation and Prairie Doc programming.
We're going to start off, I would like to start off anyway, with just talking about who Ashley is, because I think we like to know a little bit more about you, so they can have a sense of where you're from, and what kind of person you are. We can see you're beautiful and all that, but the stuff we can't see. What can tell us about you, Ashley?
So, Lawrence, I am not a native South Dakotan, but I can say that South Dakota is the longest place I've ever lived. I born in Oklahoma, grew up in Texas, and my kind of journey to South Dakota involved, I got my undergrad at the University of Oklahoma, where I met my husband, and we moved to Arkansas. And then from there, he got his master's in music, and I started law school there. And then we moved to New Jersey for a while. So we do joke that we tend to move to states where people don't necessarily seek out vacation homes in. So maybe not New Jersey, maybe not Arkansas, maybe not South Dakota. But I finished my law degree up at Seton Hall University in New Jersey, while my husband finished his doctorate up there. And we really loved our time up there. But he got the opportunity to come and teach at South Dakota State University. And so we moved here in 2007 and have been here ever since, and have really loved our community and the state, and have really loved our time here. I'll say for myself, I've always been involved in the arts as well. So big background in both the performing arts and have enjoyed all the things that involves throughout my life. But I will say a lot of I have a chemistry degree as well, but my passion is I like research. And so when this opportunity came along where I was able to use both my background in chemistry, but also my background in being able to organize and provide information to people, especially healthcare after the past 4 years, it was something I couldn't pass up, and have been enjoying my time at the Healing Words Foundation and Prairie Doc programming.
Great. Well, talk to us a little bit about Prairie Docs and Healing Words Foundation. What do they do? What's their goal? What's their role in our society?
Sure. So Prairie Doc was established back in, Healing Words Foundation was established in 2011, but Prairie Doc occurred way before that. So the founder of the Healing Words Foundation and Prairie Doc is Dr. Rick Holm and his partner, Joni Holm. Rick was a medical doctor here in Brookings, South Dakota, and his wife, Joni, was a nurse practitioner here. And for him, it was seeing a need to be able to provide his vision for Healing Words is a limitless access to truthful, tested, and timely medical information. He had a passion for education. He had a passion for accessibility, and he had a passion to help people. And so the mission of our foundation is to enhance health and diminish suffering by communicating useful information based on honest science, provided in a respectful and compassionate manner. And so all of our programming, all of our goals and our history revolve around that mission of being able to provide. Our slogan this year is based on science, built on trust. And so it's really being able to provide that medical information from trusted people in your community to people that maybe are not have access, or it's just not readily accessible to them.
So tell us a little bit about the various iterations of the Prairie Docs vision. What kind of things are guides doing?
So Dr. Holm talks a lot about he has a couple books out that before he passed in 2020 about a legacy of service. And so for him, it started with in the 80s, he started writing newspaper articles, which we still write today. We call those our Prairie Doc perspectives. And so if you're in South Dakota, we hit most newspapers here in this state. I think almost all of them. We have 170 newspapers. We send a weekly article that goes out written by, we have 4 Prairie Docs, and I'll circle back to that now since Dr. Holm has passed, that write an article about healthcare in general, or just things that you need to be thinking about. So our topic is based upon what our show is that week. So tonight we have a new show, and our show is sleep apnea. So our article this week talks about the need for getting a better night's rest and why that's important. So that's one thing that we do weekly. We also host a weekly radio show on KBRK here in Brookings, but it also streams, so you can listen to it online just in case you're not in Brookings. And we also have 2 podcasts that come out each week that are based on our radio show, what we talk about, and then our television show. But our biggest thing that we do each week is on South Dakota Public Broadcasting. Most Thursdays at 7 p.m., we host a live television show called On Call with the Prairie Doc. And so with that show, we have a different topic each week, and our Prairie Doc host brings in specialists for each of those topics. So tonight, as an example, with our sleep apnea show, we have 2 doctors, one from Sioux Falls and one from Yankton, that specialize in sleep disorders. And so they join our host in the studio. They talk about diagnosis, they talk about treatment, but we also have a phone line where you can email us and ask your questions that are about that topic. So for Dr. Holm, it's having that accessibility, even in our most rural communities in South Dakota, can feel like they can talk to a health professional about things that are bothering them.
You mentioned I'm sorry.
I was just going to say lots of things each week. So,
Okay, great. I'm hoping too, I'll remind people, please keep track of any kind of ideas or questions. So we're going to open it up to comments and questions a little bit later. So I'm hoping that you'll have some and get engaged. That's how this thing can work best, is if we have everyone engaged. Let's talk for a moment. I want to get back to the sleep apnea thing, because it's one of I think it's a very important under recognized problem in our culture. But let's talk about the 50,000-foot view of the state of health in general in South Dakota. What are some of the things that, as you think about health in South Dakota, what are some of the topics that we as citizens of the state should be at least aware of, if not concerned about?
sure. We all know South Dakota is, I think we're like the 14th largest state, but our population is small. So I looked up the census status here the other day, and we have close to like 880,000 people, but we have almost 460,000 people that live in rural areas, with only our like Meade and over in Rapid, and then well as all the towns that are around Sioux Falls are our only urban areas in our state, which is what causes a lot of our problems here for healthcare, is accessibility and just not having kind of access to all the healthcare needs that we need. I did look up, there was a study that came out in 2021 that talked about the needs of healthcare in South Dakota. They brought together the bigwigs that run both Sanford as well as Avera, just to talk about the underserved needs that we have in our state. And there are 66 counties in South Dakota, and 16 of them have adequate healthcare, and the rest of us don't, which is a major percentage of that are not medically served here in our state. And a lot of that is due to the rural communities that we have here. Our biggest problems that we're seeing right now are the biggest problems that we see nationwide: long-term healthcare for our aging population, mental health, and suicide. Like those are the major ones that we're seeing over and over again that are being talked about, especially in our state.
Okay, so are the difficulties or hurdles, are they technology based, practice based, geographic based? What is the source of the problems that we find difficult to solve?
So I think it's a combination of all of those things. I do think that we're moving towards more telehealth, especially being able to reach our more rural communities. But a lot of those communities don't have that access. But a lot of it is just population based too. We don't have a lot of rural health centers or rural hospitals that are within safe and accessible distances for a lot of people in our communities. We had just done a show here recently about EMS service workers, so emergency service professionals. And so these are not necessarily your MDs. These are the people that run our ambulances and, are providing those kind of service for us. And we are in desperate need of those people. And there's a lot of counties and communities in our state that are past that. They talk about in healthcare the golden hour. And so if you can reach somebody within that first hour of them having a problem, your ability to help that person, whether it's a heart attack or stroke or whatever, goes up considerably. But there are more than 50% of our communities that are with past an hour of that golden hour. And so how do we get to those communities to be able to make sure that they're getting adequate health care?
When you think about the major health issues, one of them you mentioned is mental health. Can you talk about how the state of mental health in South Dakota?
I would say mental health everywhere is not good. Like if we're being honest about everything,
Sure.
I do know that we uh, in South Dakota in general, we are seeing a rise in mental health issues. And whether that is anxiety or depression or suicide. Here in Brookings alone, Avera Behavioral Health this past 2 weeks received like $100,000 grant to do more outreach into our smaller communities to be able to do services that they are provided. I know that there is more outreach going on, but there's just not enough health professionals right now to meet the needs of growing problems. I did talk with one of our prairie docs because we hosted a show in the fall about suicide. We have hosted a show about anxiety here this past year. And it's getting past that stigma of needing help too, and knowing when does it become just being sad about something to something that is an actual mental health problem. And so a lot of our population sometimes here in South Dakota likes to tough it out. We're a great group of people that I don't need to go see a doctor, I'll be fine kind of thing. But that sometimes spirals into something more. And so one of the main components of our program is advocating for people to make sure that they are talking to their health professional. They are going each year and getting that annual exam. So they're talking to them about preventative health care, about things that may come up that maybe they're holding inside, or they're just, sloughing it off, pretending like it's not an issue. So.
Well, that one of the things that was brought up long years ago when I was studying emergency medicine is that it's difficult for the non-professional to know when something is an emergent problem and when it's something they can go to the clinic for. And if we extend that, I think it's equally, if not more difficult, for people to discern or decide when should I go to the doctor for this rash, or this funny little discoloration that showed up yesterday, and when it's just like, well, wait a couple of days. Or to back up, one of my mentors, who was the first children's doctor in California, and he was a dean of the dental program, children's dentist, I should say. So he told me the story about one of the graduations that their speaker started off his speech by saying 80% of the problems people come to you with will take care of themselves if you do absolutely nothing. But for God's sakes, don't tell anybody. So how do people know, if they're in that 80% or the 20%?
So I would, and this is where I think our program is very unique, where you can utilize that kind of thing. So with our On Call with the Prairie Dog program on Thursday nights, you can call in with those questions. I would say the doctors would always advocate if you're having heart problems, chest problems, breathing problems, anything like that, you should seek immediate help, always. But if there's something that is bothering you, more than likely go have it checked out. And I know that, and for all of us, that sometimes poses problems because we're talking about financial things too, right? We're talking about having to either take off work to make sure you drive that hour if you live in a rural place in South Dakota, or can I afford this kind of thing as well? They are getting better about having financial programs, especially in our state, that can help subsidize medical needs. The expansion that just passed on the last voting ballot is amazing. It does get us 72,000 more people on some healthcare plan, which helps us and puts our percentage of people without healthcare in South Dakota fairly low. It's good, but there's always that need of and want and worry that maybe we can't afford it. But I would always advocate, if it's something that is bothering you, you should go in, always.
Well, I think in addition to the financial issue is one of a social issue, because people don't want to be thought of as a hypochondriac, somebody who just complains about everything. But as a person who's feeling the thing, you don't really know. Well, it's, I mean, quite frankly, if you have gas, it could feel like you're having a heart attack if you don't know
Absolutely.
how to determine the difference. And, you say, well, if you're demanding like I need to have an ambulance because I think I'm going, how would you know? And how do you guys, or do you help people to help with that?
I think for, we had a conversation with the doctors about this the other day, about people that come in a lot to see a doctor and whatnot. And they said, we don't care. We want you to come in. We want you to come in. We want you to feel secure about your health. We want to be that support system that you need to be able to do that, because sometimes there may be a chance that that gas isn't gas. And so we want to make sure that your entire health, because sometimes when those things happen too, it's not just your physical health, it's your mental health too that is suffering from that. And a lot of times there are underlying problems associated with other things that present themselves as smaller problems that end up being bigger problems. So they would, we were talking to somebody the other day about just, they were worried about, what were we talking about? Prostate exams. And so about how sometimes men do not like to come in to have a prostate exam. I will say it's different now than what it is in the past, but the doctors say, we don't think about that when we see you in public. We do not, that's, you are there as our patient. We are there in a clinical setting, and we don't think about the whatever you came in when we see you in public. And so there's no need to be embarrassed about those kind of things. We want you to come in because we want you to be healthy.
Well, of course, the conundrum that you face is that embarrassment is not a logical thing.
Absolutely.
It's an emotional thing. So the reasoning doesn't have anything to do with it. People feel embarrassed, and it doesn't matter how many times you tell them, they still feel, especially like if a guy's going in for a prostate exam and his doctor is a woman, I mean, we don't have the, let's say, the social things that we do to give people like, well, here's what this is what you can do and what you can't do in society, and those little unspoken social rules. I don't know that we prepare people very well to even go to the doctor. Sometimes they don't have the language to tell, because they talk about, they don't know what's inside of their body. And when they find out, they get grossed out about it because they have never seen, or nobody's talked to them about that before. I mean, things like that should make, I would think, in fact, I can tell you stories about how that really impacts the physician's ability to have a conversation, let alone cure the person.
I absolutely agree. And I would say we've had two of our shows recently about preventative care, and then one about grief too, and how as a society as a whole, we don't talk about the importance of both making sure that we're staying, talking with our doctor about healthy, and having that kind of base point every year that they can go back and look at things, which also with our grief show, we don't talk about grief too. Like, it's two things that are very much ignored and just kind of push through those kind of things, but are hugely important for your overall health, both physical and mental.
Yes. I want to take a moment now, or as many moments as we need, to engage our other esteemed panel in this conversation. So if you're on this call, raise your hand or unmic or something like that, so I can see that you have some comment, question, or other interaction that you have. Anybody?
I did see a question in the chat there, Lawrence.
Okay, go ahead.
It says, are physicians referring patients to a mental health provider when indicated, or do they tend to address a mental health issue from their base of specialty and physical causation? I would say that if I was talking with the prairie docs, I would say both. I think it would depend on the situation. It depends on where that depression, anxiety is stemming from. Is it coming from an actual well, is it coming from a health related issue? Or is it something that they really need to talk to? I would say they do not hesitate to refer people to mental health advisors. Like they absolutely use that as a resource.
Mhm. Do you find much connection between the, or do docs make a point of connecting the physical and mental health people?
I
Do they
I
make that?
think, yeah, I think I was talking to Dr. Ridgway, who's the dean of the medical school here, a couple weeks ago, and we were talking about doctors in general. We have a show coming up where we're talking about a journey of a doctor. So the process of uh, how you become a doctor, how you get into medical school, and then what you do while you're there and afterwards. And he said that medical school in general has been changing, especially over the past 10 years, just because of the mental health crisis, where we talk about using more of the humanities. They have to take a couple humanities courses now while they're in medical school, but also assessing the person as a whole. So both physical and mental. And so that way they're able to, they're looking at people differently now than what we were 10, 20 years ago, just because there has been better research, but then there's also been better acceptance of people having mental health issues now than before.
It would seem like that's something that would impact to if a person's having a mental health issue, some of them, it can lead to physical things. And if they have physical things, especially some of the medications you deal with, that you take for various things, they can create mental health problems in and of themselves. And you have to make interesting choices there. So it would seem like the two would have, and training would have to go hand in hand.
Well, and if we even circle back to tonight's show, sleep apnea, Dr. Cruz talks about how anxiety is one of those things that causes you to be unable to sleep. But yes, the other problem about that is that sometimes the medications also affect that you take for being anxiety and depression also cause you to be able to unable to sleep. And so it's kind of a circular motion there. And it's really having that partnership with your healthcare provider to find what's the best solution for you. And that's mental health and physical health.
Mhm. Anyone else have questions? I'm going to return to this issue, but I want to keep it open for people who might have questions. You can put them in the chat, or you can unmic, raise your hand, or however you want to do that. Okay, Marge.
Yeah, she mentioned that doctors, when they're in training, take more humanities courses now. What would that consist of?
So a lot of their courses now are focusing on seeing the patient as a whole. So you're not going in just with a clinical view of what's physically wrong with them. You're having a bed or bedside manner when you're talking to them. You're being able to relate to that patient. You're trying to essentially form a relationship with them. And this is why having those yearly annual exams with that doctor that you trust, who knows about you, who knows what your previous medical problems are. So that way they're able to, a lot of us, like Lawrence was talking about, don't like to talk about the things that are going on in our lives. But you want to be able to talk to your healthcare professional because some of that bleeds over into what's causing your health problems. And so their classes that they're having now is talking about having that personal relationship with each of their patients and looking at it more than just, how do I solve this blood pressure problem? How do I get to the root of this? Is it being caused by stress or depression? Is it just a healthcare issue? Is it a chronic thing that's happening? But make sure they're listening to the patient and kind of finding out what's going on as a whole.
Anyone else have something they want to add or question? Going once, going twice, gone. For the time being, we'll come back to this. Early in this program, you mentioned the the issue of sleep. And according to my notes and calculations, sleep is one of the major health crisis, or lack of sleep is one of the major health, poor health outcome causes in the United States. And it seems like, especially with our culture of, nothing comes to a dream, sleep but a dream, kind of, like, and seeing like staying awake and only needing 2 hours of sleep as some kind of heroic act. Can you talk to us about the importance of sleep, and so especially since you guys are going to be talking about sleep apnea? What kinds of things does a lack of sleep cause health-wise?
Sure. Dr. Cruz on our radio show yesterday talks about 1 in 3 people do not get enough sleep anywhere between 5 and 7 days a week. I know that I told her I was one of those people, mainly because I stay up too late, either reading a book or watching a show, or I hate to admit it, scrolling on my telephone, looking at things. But a lot of people, it's not necessarily because they're choosing to do that, it's because they're having issues doing that. And while sleep can be just a normal problem of just not being able to sleep, a lot of it comes with age and change, but a lot of it is other things. We're talking about menopause, we're talking about depression, we're talking about blood pressure problems, heart problems, dental and oral health problems also cause sleep. There's a multitude of things that we don't necessarily think of that cause those kind of issues, but do relate back to those kind of things. There are numerous things that you can have done that does provide people with that relief that they're needed, because Dr. Cruz was just talking about several of her patients did a sleep apnea test, and they've got most of the major hospitals. So none of our rural hospitals, our very rural hospitals, have sleep studies. And so you can go in, they hook you up with wires and all this stuff, and they watch you sleep. And so they can notice if you're having trouble breathing. They have an index that they follow on how many times you stop breathing per hour. And so it's a range of 0 to 10, where if you hit that 5 range, then they determine that you have sleep apnea. And so after that, they go into the procedures on how they can help you have a better night's sleep. And those range from having wearing the mask and having the machine, the CPAP machine, to sometimes those on the lower end of the scale, like 5 or lower. Sometimes it's actually just changing the position that you sleep causes that all the parts in your throat to relax and to go down the way that they need to. She said the most common reason that people come in to have sleep apnea test is that their partner thinks they snore too loud. So, but
ironically, that's the least of their problems,
yes, absolutely not.
It's what they're going to do when they're awake. Yeah. That's going to be their problem. But I'm sorry, I interrupted.
Yeah, no, and it's one of those things that we don't necessarily think about. But if 1 in 3 people are suffering from those kind of problems, it does affect the way that you act during the day, how you're able to work, how even if you are retired, how you're interacting and having a good quality of life. And so it is one of those things that if is left untreated, it does cause further issues, whether that is heart problems or blood pressure problems or anything else. It does eventually spiral into more serious issues.
Can you expand a little bit on that? Because it seems like there's a whole list of things that come from that, and they can also serve as a self-indicator that maybe you should be, if you're having those things. Let's say nobody complains about your snoring, and sometimes people don't snore, apparently they just stop breathing. So maybe nobody's complaining. Maybe you have intimidated your partner to the point that they don't dare complain, but the person who could help you, they're not saying anything, and let him die, But can you talk a little bit about what are some of the symptoms that people can maybe get a clue that maybe I ought to be checking this my lack of sleep out?
Sure. So Dr. Cruz talks about in her essay where it's a lot of untreated health conditions interrupt and affect sleep. She talks about things from an enlarged prostate, hot flashes, acid reflux, and restless legs are ones that can do it. Weight can also affect the lack of sleep and your appetite and sense of fullness, because your lack of sleep increases your hormone, which increases your appetite, which even partial sleep deprivation can increase the body's resistance to insulin. And then she also talks about the risk of heart attacks and high blood pressure. With your body, there's a hormone that regulates the rhythm and increases in the morning hours. And so if you're not getting that hormone and it's releasing more or releasing less, it does up the risk of you having a heart attack if you're not getting a sleep. She referenced this week on the radio show a study that found that there was a 24% increase in heart attacks on the Monday after daylight savings time, which was pretty interesting because I know a lot of us, I am guilty of probably not getting enough sleep, or, being able to sleep that extra hour. But even that little bit of time does affect all those kind of things. There's a lot of immune components that work while you sleep too. So your body is fighting infections, and a good night's sleep also helps consolidate memories, and it improves your creativity, and can even improve, if you are an athlete, improve your sports performance. So it's not just necessarily being able to function the next day. Is essential to your overall health to make sure that you are getting a good night's rest.
Excellent. Do we have another one? Oh, no, that's not it. I thought we might have had another chat question. Let's talk a little bit about mental health again, because we talked a little bit about the sleep, and we should mention too that there's that connection between lack of sleep and mental health. But that said, can you give us some of, let's say, the top 5 or 10 mental health issues that we have in South Dakota?
I think it's like everybody else. We're talking about anxiety. We're talking about depression. Suicide has been a big talk that's been lately. We've been seeing a major increase in that over here in South Dakota. But all of those have different facets to all those kind of things too. I would say that our younger generation is better about advocating for themselves and for mental health than our older generation lately, and knowing that we do need some help. We are seeing, I know in Brookings, I sit on the Mental Health Coalition group here in Brookings, so they meet every month, and they were talking about statistics of suicide in Brookings, specifically of the high school. And last year, from August to December, they had 16 kids try to commit suicide, and that is a very big number. Especially for our school is not that big, and we were on the low end of those things. Wow. And so it is a health crisis that we're having. I do say that they also see a lot of, especially during this past pandemic, some farmers and some rural those that work in our rural communities, they've seen an increase in that too, just from the stress that has happened the past 4 years. We're seeing a larger increase of that. And I mean, if we're being honest, you can watch the news and things are more in the limelight now than ever to talk about mental health, but all of those that are struggling with it, and people that we have lost here, even in South Dakota, but nationwide, you're seeing and I don't know if it's because we're talking about it more, but an increase in those kind of episodes, but it also has been spurring the conversation that we need more.
That's right. Well, one of the things that I how can I say I have observed is that often our personal health problems are societal or global, and the cause of it is not just ourselves, but the environment in which we live in, whether it's a social, physical, or whatever environment. So as we're dealing with things like mental health, especially when we talk about stress, suicide, and those kind of things, is it enough for the individual to be coping with it? Or what are the bigger things that as a society we might be addressing to lower, for example, the incidence of suicide? Because if you listen to people when they're talking about their anxieties, which often leads them to their suicide attempts, uh, logically, it makes sense that somebody could say, I don't see any way out. I mean, and if you try to talk about it, many people, they'll talk about it after you have taken the 2 bottles of aspirin. But before that, they were kind of brushing you off and there was no place to go before you got to the crisis mode. So is there anything that we should be doing, an approach that we should be doing to not have the pressures that bring on the anxiety, that brings on the suicide attempt?
I think I'll say it's a really big question. I think in general, we're learning. That's what I would say healthcare providers would say. We're learning how to deal with this crisis. South Dakota this year has joined, there's a hotline, 988 hotline, that has mental health professionals that you can call anytime for free and talk with them, whether it's suicide assistance or assistance with your mental health, but they also have it's mental health counselors that are there. I would say that, I mean, I personally look at things where I have a teenager and I look at her stress as a 15-year-old versus what my stress as a 15-year-old, and it looks very different.
Yes.
And I think that there are good things about what's happening now, but there are harder things, right? And so always talk to your healthcare professional, seek that help out. And I think the biggest thing that suicide prevention hotline, mental health professionals, is to ask the question. That's their main line that they tell people. Do not be afraid to ask someone if they're having a problem. I think sometimes we as a society try to not ignore is not the word, but we don't want the uncomfortableness that comes with knowing that someone is struggling, or, oh, they'll be fine, it's just something, but sometimes it's not. And so their campaign that they're pushing, Avera sent one out this year, Sanford sent one out this year, but the national one from the CDC and everything is ask the question. Do not be afraid to have that uncomfortable conversation with a friend who is struggling, because you do not know how that will impact and how that will help that person. I know that the health professionals would always say, if you are struggling, come in. We will find someone to help you, always.
But if I'm understanding your response to my question, the mental health, shall we say, industry, or the school of mental health, they have not gotten to the point that they're dealing with cause. They're still dealing with symptoms. In other words, they're saying, well, once you're sick or you feel some symptoms, call us and let's talk about the symptoms. But they're not looking at, like, for example, you talked about your teenage child, and they're not talking about, hey, look, maybe we have expectations that are too high for some people. Maybe the social signals and expectations that we have are contradictory, at least to the point that a person who's like 12 or 13 years old, whose brain is going through complete reorganization, they can't deal with it as we're asking them to deal with it. We're going to have more and more people fall through the cracks as we raise the bar, the expectation bar higher. Sounds like the industry is not talking about that. They're just talking about, once you feel like suicide or you feel something's messed up, call us.
I think what's hard about it is that every person is very unique, right? Every situation is very unique, and that our health professionals can advocate for a lot of change, but it also takes the society to also do that change too. And so
absolutely.
I know that in our household, we very much, for a very, very long time, we did not have social media for our children, like our just here in the past couple of years. And she still has huge restrictions on her phone, just because as a 15-year-old, she doesn't need access to all of that information. But that's not necessarily the same for everybody.
Mm.
And so, in general, I think that society will have to look at it differently, because our mental health professionals are always learning and always trying to help and always do those things. But until we as a society decide that we're going to make that change, there's just going to always be issues that arise.
Right. And I guess what I'm asking is the industry or school, are they talking back to the society and saying, hey, look, or are they even looking at, here are the causes for these, not there. In other words, there's some systemic things because the repetition suggests that there are, at least the repetition suggests that there are some systemic things that are difficult for young people, not to mention older people, to handle. The expectations, social change, and different ways that you see yourself. Are we helping people to make the social adjustments? Even though we can say social media, we had these problems before there was social media. It's just that social media lets us know about it, whereas before people were more in denial. Let's say, for example, we have like gender things that people we had it, but we hid it. We hid those dilemmas, and now people are saying, well, I don't want to be in the closet or in the attic anymore. I'm me, and I want to be me whenever I go outside. I don't want to have to change my. Okay, so now some people now they're faced with it, but they don't know what to do with it. So to me, those kind of stresses, the questions, they seem to be part of people's anxiety, So are we getting any feedback or are people even thinking about, well, what should the feedback be? What could we tell people? How can we help people to cope with social change? Where, let's say, for example, they used to think of themselves easily as the superior race. Now somebody says, that's not really a thing. Well, what do I do with my identity now when my identity was completely embedded in, I look like this, so therefore I'm superior. What do we do with that kind of anxiety? Anybody talking about that?
I would say that our health professionals always try to address those issues, but I think that that's also one of those where I would speak that it's pockets of individuals that are doing great things, right? So we're seeing these people that are actively trying to make the change that we need in society, like I do. But I also think that with that, it just takes time. Like I don't think that I know our health professionals know that these are issues, but a lot of times individuals that need help don't seek help. And so it's, how do you reach those people that need that kind of extra help in their life, whether it's mental health or it is having a hard time to change. And we're seeing amazing community members, amazing individuals that are spurring that change. It just takes a lot of time for things to catch up, to be able to make those positive impacts within our communities, whether it's in South Dakota or the nation. Unfortunately, right now, and I myself limit the amount of news that I watch every day just because it gives me anxiety, and do just a little bit at nighttime so I know what I'm keeping on. But a lot of people have read it, they look all the time. My father's an example. He watches the news and NPR all the time. And it gives him anxiety, but he also doesn't stop doing it. So how do you make that? How do you ask people to make those small changes that are hard?
Yeah.
And so it's just hoping that all of these amazing change makers in the world are making that impact. And if it's one person or if it's 100 people, they're being able to, that starts to multiply. We just kind of have to hope that those changes stick and get us where we need to go.
Yeah. Well, I don't want to sort of beat it into the ground, but I keep pointing toward how do we develop coping skills for everybody? And it seems like the mental health community are uniquely poised to interject that conversation into the public dialogue. It's like, here's some ways that you can cope, not with burying your head about the news, but here's the way to manage your coping skills when as you hear the news, here are some ways. And if they don't know, then say that, and then let's look to see if there's a better way to cope. I guess.
Well, and I think our mental health community, whether we're talking about counselors or nurses or doctors or whoever is helping with those kind of things, absolutely has coping skills. Like they know the things that need to be done. But it's just convincing people that they need to be able to think of things differently. I think that's the issue with a lot of it too. So
great. Let's talk about diet. That's
okay.
another thing. And I don't mean like, can I get in my bikini this summer? I mean diet as opposed to like, what does the body need? What are you guys, what's your party line about diet and how do you help people with that?
Sure. So the Prairie Docs, if they're talking about being in overall health, they talk about eating a healthy diet, which includes fruits and vegetables. They talk about making sure that you exercise regularly, and we're not talking about excessive exercise. They always say that if you can go on a 30-minute walk 3 times a week, you're getting up and moving your body. That's what they say. Leads to both a healthy lifestyle. And so Dr. Holm, one of his big proponents is that it was to try to eat as many fruits and vegetables as you can. But there is not a focus, I will say, on BMI or certain weight or anything like that. That's not how they measure as physicians anymore, a healthy person. They look at your weight, but they also look at your overall health, blood pressure, oxygen level, all those kind of things now. And so for them, they just say there is a recommended, if you talk with the dietitian at any of your healthcare systems, they have a recommended amount of fruits, vegetables, carbohydrates, meat products that you should be eating each week, and try to stay within those guidelines. They do not have a calorie count anymore. And they also just say moderate, a couple walks a week is good.
I got distracted there. I had my phone on so I could make sure that anybody who is having trouble getting on, I could talk to them, but then I forgot to turn it off again. So anyway, to pick up where you were talking about on what you were talking about with exercise, do you have any particular regimen, or is it just walking, as you say, just the 30 minutes 3 times a week?
They just want you to get out and move. That's what they recommend, that you're moving somewhere, that you're not living a sedentary lifestyle, so you're not sitting all the time. I think that we have to be careful for especially those that work in an office or use their computer all the time. They recommend getting up and moving around always. And that can vary from person to person. They do know that sometimes whether it's you might have a physical disability, or you may have some pain that preventing you from doing that. They will gladly work with you to be able to find that thing that keeps you moving, because there are a lot of programs out there, even in our smaller communities, that make that movement accessible. So,
well, right along with a diet and exercise is the household environment. There was a time when people really made an emphasis on, let's say, a clean house, until the point that they found out actually you can have your house too clean, and that's a problem too. Do you guys ever do anything on like, well, what's the best amount of microorganisms to have in your refrigerator, and what should they look like?
I will say, I don't know if we've ever talked about that, and I would be scared to swab my own refrigerator to see what is growing in it. But I don't know if it, I mean, you should, you know, no, I would say they do not have an opinion about that. I think that they are, some people's, your home is your sanctuary, and it should be what you want it to be.
Well, yes, it should, but they do have an impact.
It does.
It has an impact on your health, and not only just the microorganisms, but certain outgases, like things, radon and things like that. They're all of those, your home environment, for many people, that's where they spend most of their time.
Yeah.
And they're completely unfamiliar with it. So it's not so much a matter of judgment, it's a matter of awareness that, here are some things. If you're feeling a certain kind of headache, you could have carbon monoxide in your house. How would you tell? How would a person who doesn't even know there's such a thing as carbon monoxide be made aware of? They should be paying attention to it.
I will say I can absolutely table that and put that as a discussion, but for ourselves, and those are absolutely important things. I mean, we have a basement here, and we have a gas furnace, so I know that we have carbon monoxide detectors, but it just, and I think for health professionals in general, it's probably the after effects of those kind of things, right, that we see our doctors for. Are we having those frequent headaches, and what are they coming from? And sometimes it is your home. It is, maybe you're sensitive to a certain smell. Maybe you have extra dust and pollen in your furnace, and it's spreading it through your house, which is causing you health problems. So those things I do know are talked about. They're just not maybe specifically talked about as your home in general too. So.
Okay. Well, I think that one of the things that I have, that I'm coming away with, is that all of us, not just the prairie docs, but all of us have a lot of work to do to bring to the fore, at our forefront of our minds, our health and the kind of things that we need to address with our health. I'm going to give one more last opportunity. Anybody have a question? We only have like a couple minutes. Anybody have a question they want to ask? No? Well, there is one more thing that I would like to, it's a short time to talk about it, but one more thing, emergent care.
Okay.
I think that you mentioned before, we have kind of a lack of that, especially in rural areas, or it's not adequate, let's put it that way. What's down the pike? What are we doing to solve that? Or is it one of those problems we just have to live with?
I hope that it's never one of those problems we have to live with. I think as a state, we are recognizing that having emergency medical services is essential, especially for our communities that are an hour past a hospital. So there are a couple programs that are being established that help those kind of things. So the medical school down in the Sanford School of Medicine that we have here in South Dakota has a program called the FARM program. So it's the Frontier and Rural Medicine track. And so those doctors, they start their first year medical student, and they go all the way through with the specific notion in mind that they will be serving in rural communities. And so part of their training is a little bit different than the traditional medical track. And they go out into our smaller communities and they work under doctors that are there. And so it has been highly successful. They're seeing around 13 students each year that join that, with the incentive that they are getting some major scholarships if they stay here in South Dakota. And so we know that it is essential to look at our future doctors to make sure that we have a large aging population in our rural communities of physicians. And we need to be able to have people that are willing to take over those populations and take those positions to help those in our smaller communities. One of the other things that we're doing is, as a state, the company Agtegra, and I actually do not know where their headquarters are. I know they have a place up towards Aberdeen, but Agtegra is a company that has workers that helps. It's an ag company that helps farmers throughout the state. And so they have been training all of their employees. So they have 150 employees that travel throughout the state of South Dakota. They have been training them all as EMS workers. So when they are out in our smaller rural communities, they have an AED, which is our paddles that you put on to shock a heart, as well as a ditch kit. And then they've been trained as an emergency medical professional. And so those ditch kits have the mask that you put on to do CPR, as well as a stop the bleed kit inside of them as well, in case someone has fallen and they need that emergency assistance. And they have all also been trained in rescues in grain bins, which is something that is a little bit more common than other states here in South Dakota. And so every year they go through trainings to be able to help those special needs in our more rural communities and especially our farms. There is a program also through Sanford that pays for you to be an EMS worker. And so a lot of it is online now, just because not all of us can drive to Sioux Falls to take that course. Right. And they are asking people to do it. And the problem with it is mostly volunteer. And so you have to have a job that is willing to let you off to be able to go help those people in need. And it's getting the word out there to our communities and to our people that this is a need. So we are doing stuff. It just, like everything, it's a little bit slower, but there are programs that are established to help with that.
Well, thank you very much. We've run over our time, but I thank you so much for contributing to this conversation, and thank you all of our panelists for participating. Thank you, and we'll see you next week, same time, same station.
Thanks, Lawrence. Thank you, Humanities Council.